The biggest threat to your future is not incompetence, but the sudden, paralyzing desire to talk about it. We are taught that transparency is a virtue, that sharing our dreams manifests them into reality. But this is a sentimental lie designed by the mediocre majority to keep the ambitious powerless. The truth is simple and brutal. The moment you convert a difficult, unproven intention into a comfortable conversational anecdote, you have already guaranteed its failure. This is not some esoteric law of the universe. It is a fundamental principle of dark psychology and the cruel economics of human attention. The law of concealment dictates that potential energy must remain unobserved until it is forced into kinetic reality. When you reveal your great plans, the blueprint for the empire, the outline of the revolutionary product, the rigorous schedule for personal transformation, you trigger a perverse psychological trap known as goal dilution. Your brain, hungry for social validation and efficiency, confuses the verbal performance of the plan with its actual execution. By receiving affirmation, the sweet corrosive hit of dopamine that comes from an approving nod or a shallow, "That's amazing," the brain ticks the box and rewards you for the idea of the struggle, neutralizing the urgent need for the struggle itself. You have prematurely cashed out the internal motivation that was meant to fuel months of silent, grueling work. The feeling of being on the path is mistaken for having reached the destination. The fire necessary to burn through years of resistance suddenly dissipates into the lukewarm air of external validation, leaving you with an impressive story and absolutely no drive to finish the necessary, unglamorous tasks. If you are tired of shallow answers, of feel-good psychology that never delivers, and recognize the toxic banality of consensus reality, subscribe now. This channel is dedicated to understanding the true hidden levers of human power and performance. Beyond the internal psychological leak, there is the devastating external cost. Every single plan you share enters the volatile ecosystem of other people's projections, insecurities, and subconscious malice. Do not mistake this for cynicism. It is merely an accurate assessment of human behavior. When you reveal a grand plan, you are fundamentally unsettling the social contract that governs your relationships. People do not want you to change dramatically, especially if that change involves ascending to a higher tier of power or influence than they currently occupy. Your success is a mirror held up to their own inaction. The moment you reveal your intention, you have provided others with 4 dangerous things: a timetable for obstruction, a metric for premature judgment, a cheap form of entertainment, and, most potently, the fuel for envy. Envy, subtle and pervasive, is the default human response to true ambition. It rarely manifests as overt sabotage. It works through quiet discouragement, undermining advice, subtle erosion of confidence, and the deployment of the most powerful psychological weapon in the human arsenal: doubt. When the inevitable friction of execution begins, and you are exhausted and doubting, those small seeds of skepticism planted by well-meaning but envious friends will blossom into overwhelming conviction. Their quiet disbelief becomes your internal echo chamber, affirming your fear that the plan was, perhaps, too ambitious after all. The true master of self-creation understands that silence is not merely the absence of speech. It is a weapon, a vessel, and a deliberate act of energetic preservation. While you are silently assembling your fortress, the world assumes you are doing nothing remarkable. This provides the ultimate advantage: the element of surprise, which is nothing more than unobserved preparation. Your intention must exist in a state of pure dark matter. It must have an unseen gravitational pull that shapes your reality without announcing its presence to the orbiting, chaotic interference of others. The energy of the plan must be a closed circuit, running constantly through the wires of your focus, accumulating voltage, never leaking out as verbal steam. The secret plan is shielded from the corrosive elements of external validation, mockery, and the psychological burden of being perpetually observed. Until the structure is complete, until the foundation is immovable and the roof is sealed, let the world believe you are merely tending the garden, while in reality you are forging the sword. But there is a far darker reason to maintain that discipline of silence. one that speaks less to the malice of others and more to the catastrophic self-sabotage built into the wiring of the human brain. The true psychological peril of announcing your intention is that your mind mistakes the utterance for the accomplishment. When you articulate a grand future goal, a book written, a business launched, a physique achieved, you receive an immediate cheap shot of psychological validation. Your dopamine system, which is fundamentally lazy and easily fooled, registers the verbal description of the success as a down payment on the actual success. The brain rewards the narrative of effort before the reality of execution has even begun, granting you the ego boost, the fleeting sense of achievement, and the social praise you were seeking, all without lifting a finger. You have, in effect, spent the emotional energy required for the labor before the labor even began, leaving your reserves depleted when the cold, brutal moment of actual work arrives. This is the phenomenon of verbal exhaustion. Talking about the plan tricks the brain into thinking the strenuous part is over. It is a profound self-betrayal, a neurological shortcut that sacrifices future fortitude for present vanity. The silent actor, conversely, denies themselves that premature payoff. They maintain a state of intentional, energetic debt. The only way to receive the reward is through the grueling, non-verbal reality of the labor itself. The accumulated tension, the internal pressure generated by the secret, unvoiced ambition, becomes the necessary fuel. The cognitive urgency that demands release not through conversation but through creation. If you find value in confronting these subtle, often painful truths about human nature and the mechanics of ambition, make sure you subscribe now. There are shadows of the self we must examine rigorously, and you won't want to miss the analysis of how the mind systematically undermines its own highest potential. Beyond this internal self-sabotage lies the external pressure of the narrative fallacy. Once you announce your ambition, you have drawn a highly specific, linear line in the sand. You have sacrificed the most essential tool of the ambitious, flexibility. True creation is rarely a straight line. It is a series of clumsy pivots, humiliating retreats, chaotic shifts, and ugly, unphotogenic failures. Silence grants you the immunity to fail in private. It allows you to scrap the entire blueprint and start anew without having to file a public explanation, without facing the grim satisfaction of those who knew, or rather hoped, you wouldn't make it. The moment you disclose the specific trajectory, you become a prisoner of that trajectory, forced to continue down a path that logic may have long abandoned, purely to save face and satisfy the audience you foolishly created. The builder who works in silence can demolish the entire foundation at midnight and begin again at dawn, accountable only to the brutal efficiency of the outcome. The verbal architect must constantly perform the maintenance of the public story, even if the structure is collapsing internally. We suffer from revealing our plans because, deep down, most people prefer the safety of shared mediocrity. Your silence is a sign that you are not participating in the consensual delusion that most lives are bound by acceptable limitations. Your ambition, when voiced, acts as a dangerous mirror held up to the compromises of everyone listening. If you, their peer, their friend, their colleague, succeed grandly, what does that say about the life they have settled for? Their inevitable discouragement, disguised as concern or realistic advice, is not about you at all. It is a defensive reflex, an immediate attempt to restore psychological equilibrium by pulling you back into the comfortable, lukewarm water of the accepted norm. They are not trying to stop your success. They are trying to protect their own narrative of why they haven't achieved more. The secret ambition forces you to rely on intrinsic motivation alone. It strips away the crutch of external validation, which is a poisonous sugar rush guaranteed to lead to a crash. If your only reward for effort comes from the sound of your own voice narrating your future success, you are building a house on sand. The silent master understands that the reward is the finished object itself, the tangible, irrefutable proof of execution. The process of keeping the plan locked away forces a rigorous internal vetting process. Any idea that cannot survive the harsh light of solitary self-criticism, any plan that requires the cheers of others to be deemed worthy, is inherently weak and deserves to be discarded. This is the dark crucible of creation. The belief must be so strong, the conviction so total, that the plan can survive long stretches of utter loneliness without a single soul to affirm that you are not, in fact, utterly mad. The truth is that until you achieve the goal, you are nothing more than a potential, a possibility, a dreamer. And the world loves nothing more than to watch a dreamer fail. By keeping silent, you deny the world that cheap entertainment and maintain your status as an unquantifiable threat. The energy that others expend monitoring your progress, gossiping about your chances, or planning their quiet discouragement is energy they are not spending on their own lives. You have subtly redirected their focus outward toward a ghost project while you work relentlessly inward. Silence is strategic misdirection on a grand scale. The silence of ambition is the discipline of the fully committed, the sign of a psyche that has learned to prioritize ruthless efficiency over fleeting emotional comfort. It is the necessary quarantine that shields genius from the infection of common sense. The social media era has inverted this fundamental truth, teaching us to confuse visibility with viability, to believe that a project is real only after it has been announced with fanfare and received its requisite quota of heart emojis. But if you look at the rare moments of true history-shifting creation, you will find that the most consequential goals were executed in terrifying isolation. Consider the Manhattan Project. Hundreds of thousands of people worked toward a single, horrifying objective. Yet the vast majority of those workers could not know the final deliverable. The goal was so immense, so morally ambiguous, and so utterly disruptive that if the public had been given access to the plan before the execution, the internal political pressure, the journalistic scrutiny, and the sheer inertia of common sense would have crushed the project under the weight of premature ethical paralysis. The success of that project was not due to inspirational talks or early-stage hype. It succeeded because the goal, the final destructive proof, was sequestered in the New Mexico desert, shielded from every critic, every journalist, and every opposing moralizing voice, until the moment of irrefutable, blinding physical fact. The world was given no advance notice, no chance to compromise the vision, only the shocking, undeniable reality of its existence. That is the blueprint for silent mastery. Deliver the result, not the intention. The silent master understands that the human brain treats a verbally stated intention as a partial fulfillment of the goal itself. When you tell others, you get a small, satisfying dose of dopamine, a neurochemical cheat code that tricks your reward system into believing the hard work is already underway or even complete. This psychological dissipation is sabotage disguised as enthusiasm. Every time you share your goal, you are subtly subtracting commitment from the final effort, chipping away at the necessity of the grind. You are bleeding energy onto a stage for applause that you haven't yet earned. If you crave the kind of perspective that peels back these surface-level psychological traps, if you want the analysis that recognizes the absolute necessity of strategic discipline, then you need to subscribe right now. Don't let these deeper truths disappear into the algorithm, drowned out by content that prioritizes comfort over ruthless self-improvement. The silence preserves the psychological hunger. It ensures that the only way to satisfy the internal tension is through physical execution, through the grinding, repetitive effort that eventually manifests the unseen blueprint into the tangible world. This commitment to isolation is precisely why the silent path is so unpopular and so terrifying to most. Silence forces you to confront the absolute loneliness of ambition. You are robbing yourself of the comforting mirror of other people's affirmation. You have no one to run to when the plan hits an inevitable obstacle, no one to commiserate with when the motivation flags at 3 a.m. This is not a bug, it is the core feature. This forced self-reliance is the engine of resilience. If your conviction is strong enough, the loneliness becomes a purification chamber, burning away every unnecessary social distraction and emotional dependence. The cost of admission to true mastery is often the temporary sacrifice of relational warmth. You must become comfortable being misunderstood, or worse, being entirely forgotten while you are deep in the forge. The world judges effort by visibility, and by removing yourself from the visible field, you are accepting a period where your efforts will be judged as non-existent, perhaps even lazy or irrelevant. But those who measure their lives by the shallow metrics of moment-to-moment social status are already disqualified from the long game. The silent plan is not just a defensive maneuver against others. It is a profound act of self-trust, a promise whispered only to oneself. I will see this through, even if I am the only witness to the struggle. This internal pact is infinitely stronger than any public vow, because the only person you are allowed to disappoint is yourself. And the silent master has learned that there is no greater moral failing than self-betrayal. The societal lie that demands immediate repudiation is the cult of sharing the process. We are told relentlessly that vulnerability is synonymous with strength, that transparency is a prerequisite for authenticity, and that the modern creator must broadcast the entire messy struggle, the failures, the doubt, the early drafts, to build a loyal audience. This is not generosity, it is intellectual prostitution. This toxic requirement to share the journey is nothing more than a sophisticated mechanism for premature psychological gratification. Every time you post a status update, every time you talk publicly about the grand project you will undertake, you are harvesting the emotional rewards of completion without having paid the physical toll of execution. You are using affirmation as a cheap substitute for actual progress. The public validation, the encouraging comments, the likes. These are tiny, addictive doses of dopamine that trick the brain into believing the work is already done, thus sapping the necessary internal tension that fuels genuine, isolated effort. The silent master understands that the energy of creation is finite and must be hoarded, not spilled across social feeds for strangers to consume and dilute. The energy required to articulate the future vision is better spent building it. When you share the blueprint too early, you not only risk intellectual theft, but more crucially, you externalize the fragile seed of self-belief, making its survival dependent on the capricious winds of public opinion. You are inviting critique before your armor is forged, allowing the doubts of others to graft themselves onto your own. The silent path is the refusal to outsource one's psychological stability. It is the deep recognition that the only audience that truly matters during the act of creation is the self. The public is owed the finished symphony, not the agonizing, discordant process of tuning the instruments. If you find this analysis challenging your deeply held beliefs about how success is built, if you crave this level of raw, unfiltered insight that refuses to cater to easy answers, then you need to ensure you hit that subscribe button right now. We are building the antidote to the content designed to keep you comfortable and small. This psychological self-containment is the fundamental difference between the perpetual amateur and the silent professional. The amateur derives identity from the intention to create. The professional derives identity from the ruthless act of creation itself. When you remove the external witnesses, you eliminate the possibility of performing for applause, leaving only the grim necessity of the work. This forces the master to rely solely on the intrinsic motivation derived from the vision, making the resulting success exponentially more robust and less susceptible to the shifting tides of external approval. The temptation to perform the struggle is a constant gravitational pull, pulling the aspiring master back toward the comfort of the crowd. We are culturally programmed to believe that loneliness is a pathology, an affliction to be cured by constant connection. But for the architect of a meaningful life, loneliness is a necessary tool, a sterilizing agent that ensures the purity of the motive. It is the crucible where genuine self-knowledge is extracted from the ore of insecurity. You cannot know the true depth of your commitment while you are surrounded by cheerleaders. You only know it when the room is empty, the clock reads 4 a.m., and the only sound is the subtle hum of your own grinding focus. The modern world has engineered a terrifying phobia of being alone with one's own thoughts, because the silence often reveals the uncomfortable truth that the life you are currently living is a fabrication built on the expectations of others, not the true architecture of your own ambition. The silent plan is, therefore, a radical act of psychological sovereignty, a declaration that your worth is measured only by the private ledger of your actions, and that the validation of the mob is fundamentally irrelevant to the quality of your output. It rejects the modern obsession with constant feedback loops, favoring instead the delayed, monolithic reward of undeniable results. The noise of contemporary culture, the endless notifications, the demand for immediate responsiveness, the manufactured crises, is not merely a distraction, it is a designed impedance against deep work, ensuring that no truly radical, world-changing thought can gestate long enough to be born. It keeps the population perpetually reactive, shallowly engaged, and psychologically dependent on the external stimulus. The silent path is the deliberate creation of psychological insulation, a thick, protective layer that allows the deep, slow burn of mastery to proceed undisturbed by the superficial flickering of the external world. The true cost of rejecting this psychological insulation is the erosion of the subjective self, replaced by what can only be termed an outsourced identity. We are constantly seeking to borrow our sense of reality from the nearest available consensus, terrified that if we unplug from the feedback loop, the internal operating system will simply crash. The fear is not truly of loneliness. It is the paralyzing dread that, when the constant echo of external approval finally ceases, we will discover there is nothing of substance left to echo from. This is the psychological mechanism of the curated life. A perpetual state of performance where identity is not a deeply forged conviction, but a continually refreshed social media profile, highly optimized for immediate acceptance. It is much easier to accept a prefabricated self, built from the expectations of your peers and the tropes fed by culture, than to endure the excruciating, isolating labor of excavating and shaping a genuine self from the bedrock of raw experience. This is why the silent path feels like violence to the modern psyche. It demands the dismantling of the convenient facade. It forces a confrontation with the uncomfortable, often brutal fact that the life you thought you were living was actually a delicate piece of theater, designed solely to minimize social friction. If this kind of unforgiving analysis resonates with you, if you crave a constant exploration of the darker architecture of human motivation, hit that subscribe button right now. We are building a fortress of genuine thought here, and you do not want to be left outside when the curtain finally drops on the manufactured reality. The silence, therefore, is not empty. It is a pressurized environment that brings to the surface all the suppressed anxieties, the unresolved failures, and the terrifying realization of one's finite responsibility. It strips away the comforting palliative of shared delusion. The greatest pain of deep work is not the intellectual difficulty, but the necessity of constant self-calibration. The willingness to fail dozens of times in complete privacy, and the painful, relentless commitment to correcting the trajectory without a single witness to applaud the attempt. The modern person avoids this pain by choosing shallow, continuous engagement, exchanging depth for the immediate, transactional reward of validation. They trade the monolithic satisfaction of a finished, solitary work for the ephemeral flicker of 100 likes. This preference for synthetic consensus over hard-won, unique truth is nothing less than psychological cowardice, masked as connectivity. They believe themselves to be citizens of the world, when in fact they are merely tenants of a highly restrictive social script. To embrace the silent plan is to fundamentally reject the tyranny of the immediate and the cult of speed. Mastery operates on geological time. Results are delayed, compound, and often invisible until the moment of the breakthrough. The noise of the external world is engineered to penalize this long-term focus, demanding constant superficial activity instead. It ensures that the creative energy of the population is dispersed into frantic, low-leverage tasks, emails, meetings, status updates, all of which provide the illusion of productivity while preventing any truly meaningful psychological gestation. To defeat this, one must cultivate a radical indifference to the external noise, treating every notification and every demand for instant reaction as an act of intellectual sabotage. This deliberate insulation is not arrogance. It is a necessary triage of finite mental resources. We must recognize that the highest forms of achievement require periods of profound, inaccessible focus that simply cannot coexist with the psychological permeability demanded by contemporary society. If you find this philosophy challenging, if you believe that genuine depth requires the courage to walk away from the crowd and support the creation of rigorous, analytical content that refuses to compromise with the mainstream noise, then please subscribe now and join this small, dedicated pursuit of truth. The final verdict on the loud life is this: it is a life lived in proxy. The person who cannot stand silence eventually realizes they have become a ghost, existing purely as a reflected image in the eyes of others. They exist only as a function of their performance, never as a self-luminous source. They sacrifice the arduous construction of an internal architecture for the convenience of constant external scaffolding. When the crowd inevitably moves on, as it always does, they find themselves utterly hollowed out, having mistaken visibility for reality and attention for genuine achievement. The silent path is the only route that guarantees the internal machinery is structurally sound and self-sustaining. The noise is not simply annoying, it is the death rattle of potential, designed to distract you until your ambition dies of neglect. The successful master is not the one who shouts the loudest, but the one whose silence is so profound, whose insulation is so complete, that the eventual emergence of their work forces the world to stop and listen. Choose the long, brutal silence over the short, comfortable lie. If you want to continue dissecting the hidden mechanisms of power, ambition, and the human mind, subscribe to the channel and join our community of deep thinkers. The final verdict on the loud life is not merely that it is ineffective, but that it is morally negligent, a refusal to engage in the necessary spiritual labor of self-creation. The constant demand for input, the fear of missing out, the terror of the empty moment. These are not symptoms of vitality, but the panic attacks of a soul that has outsourced its integrity. True authority is not granted. It is earned in the crucible of absolute solitude, where the self is forced to wrestle with its own limitations without the comforting applause of the gallery. Stop confusing your existence with your performance. Stop believing that noise is competence. The universe does not reward frantic motion. It rewards precise, sustained pressure applied to a singular point of focus. Choose to be the architect of your own silence, because only there will you find the blueprint for genuine power. Embrace the difficulty, embrace the isolation, and understand this absolute truth. The measure of a master is not what they say, but what they refuse to hear. If you are ready to commit to this severe, transformative philosophy and join others who value depth over surface, then make sure you subscribe now and become part of this community dedicated to the brutal pursuit of psychological freedom. The ultimate tragedy of the modern era is that we have mistaken visibility for vision and chronic exhaustion for meaningful effort. The loud person doesn't crave success. They crave distraction from their own inevitable failure. The life they live is a meticulously curated illusion, a palace built of mirrors and echoes. But you must understand this fundamental law of reality. When the applause stops, what remains is the structure you actually built, brick by silent brick. And for the vast majority trapped in the cycle of noise, that structure is a hollow shell, waiting to collapse the moment the spotlight moves on. Forget the audience. Forget the algorithm. Your only mission now is to become the thing that cannot be ignored. The undeniable substance forged in the furnace of focused, relentless discipline. Let them call you arrogant for your seclusion. Let them call you irrelevant for your absence. Because while they are busy performing their lives, you are busy living yours, building a monument that requires no explanation, only recognition. The final verdict is severe. The loud life is merely the coward's attempt to preemptively distract the judge before the final work is submitted. True authority is defined by the quality of the things you create when no one is looking, and the silence is the only place where creation is possible. The choice is terrifyingly simple. Be a flash of noise that quickly fades, or be the profound, structuring silence from which all true, lasting power emerges. Choose wisely, because the noise never forgives those who fail to master the silence. And this is the final, undeniable verdict. You do not find your true self in the spotlight. You find it only in the deep, cold vacuum where distraction cannot survive. The true currency of existence is not attention, but the integrity forged in the dark, and the judge of your final work is not the crowd. It is only the self you refuse to abandon in the search for applause. The loud life is a betrayal of potential, a performance that guarantees the performer will never meet the man he could have become. I leave you with this terrifying personal truth. If you cannot bear the sound of your own unfiltered thoughts for 30 minutes in a locked room, you haven't mastered silence. You are fleeing yourself. And what you run from is the only thing that can save you. True psychological freedom requires us to stop fearing the void and instead to learn how to build within it. If this necessary severity resonates, if you feel the weight of this brutal, transformative philosophy, then make sure you subscribe now. Join the few who understand the profound value of psychological solitude, and let us continue this necessary, dangerous conversation about true power in the silence. Therefore, the final verdict is this: noise is chaos, and silence is the ultimate organizing force. You were never meant to be a participant in someone else's spectacle. You were meant to be the architect of your own unassailable reality. The loud life attempts to negotiate for temporary acceptance. The silent life demands permanent respect. I assure you that when you finally shut the door on the world and commit to the terrifying work of self-creation, you will discover that the profound, terrifying silence is not an absence of sound. It is the sound of everything else finally falling away, leaving only the resonant truth of what you are capable of. Stop trying to be heard and start building something that demands to be felt. Join this community of radical thinkers, master the silence, and become the monument you were always meant to be.